Marcus's hand trembled as he placed the glass of red wine on Prince Nathaniel's table, not out of fear. Well, not just fear. It was because he had recognized that specific red, that gleam that came from no grape cultivated on earthly soil. 17 years working at the Rare Cut, Hope's Peak's most exclusive restaurant, and he still felt that chill every time he understood exactly what he was serving. But today was different. Today, sitting at the prince's table, was a boy. A deaf boy, a vampire boy who had no right to be there, and Marcus could read it in the eyes of everyone around, that silent contempt, worse than any scream. The boy, whom Marcus would later learn was named Ash, was looking down, his fingers drumming against the table in a pattern no one else recognized as communication. And sitting beside him, with the stone-cold face Marcus had learned to recognize as pure, contained suffering, was Victor, the heir, the prince's son, the boy who had everything except one thing: the freedom to be honest about loving his adopted brother. Marcus should never have seen what he saw in that moment. He should never have been close enough to notice when Victor placed his hand over Ash's, a gesture so brief it lasted less than a second, but one that carried decades of guilt, despair, and a loyalty that would destroy lives. No one else saw. No one else dared to see. But Marcus saw, and in that instant his entire life was rewritten. Because the truth was, Marcus was invisible. He had learned to be. The son of a waitress and a ghost, a man his mother never named, a man Marcus had learned not to ask about, he was exactly the kind of person vampires looked right through as if he were glass. Human, powerless, unimportant. Perfect for carrying trays and cleaning up messes, while the true characters lived their lives of immortality and decadence. His mother, Carla, was the exception. That waitress the prince had chosen as his personal favorite, not for beauty, but because she knew how to keep secrets like others hoarded gold. She spent nights turning a blind eye to things no one should know, to behaviors no one should witness. And Marcus had inherited that curse, the ability to see everything while being seen by no one. He knew the secrets of every important vampire in the city. He knew who was having affairs with whom. He knew who was weak, who was dying, who was planning to betray whom. And none of them knew he knew. Until that night. None of them would have had a reason to care. But then Ash spilled his own glass. An accident, probably. Or maybe not. Maybe it was a test, a provocation, something Marcus couldn't grasp because there was an abyss between them that wasn't just species, but lived experience. The reaction was instant. One of the lesser vampires, a Dimitri Marcus knew from having heard him murmur about removing the problem of his deafness, began to laugh. Then another. Then another. Ash couldn't hear them, but he could feel them. Marcus saw it in his eyes, in that hunch of his shoulders, in that way people flinch when they know they're being hunted. Victor stood up, the tension in his body promising imminent violence, and it was in that moment that everything began to unravel. Because Prince Nathaniel simply took another sip of his red wine, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and whispered something Marcus should never have heard. Let him learn. Let him learn. Let Ash be humiliated. Let his own son bear witness. Let the hierarchy assert itself. And Marcus, in that instant, understood that he was witnessing something few humans ever saw. Vampires weren't gods because they were immortal. They were gods because they were allowed to be cruel, and no one had enough power to stop them. Ash began to move away from the table, his fingers still drumming against any surface he could, that tactile code that was his only language in a world that refused him. And that's when the other vampires surrounded him. Not to hurt him, not yet, just to display him, to make him a living example of weakness. Marcus should have simply continued his work, should have pretended he didn't see, should have remained invisible, as was his right. But something happened inside him in that moment, something his mother had never explained. A feeling like fire in his fingers, as if the blood in his veins was calling to Ash's blood in a way that shouldn't be possible. As if an invisible cord connected that rejected boy to an invisible boy who pretended not to exist. And when one of them, a vampire Marcus had never seen before, raised his hand to shove Ash against the wall, Marcus did something no human should do. He moved, he ran, he placed himself between them. And then he placed his hand over Ash's ear. Everything stopped. The vampire's breathing, the movement of the other humans in the kitchen, the very pulse of the universe. Because in that fraction of a second, when Marcus's fingers grazed Ash's ear, something awakened, something ancient, something that should have been dead. A magic that pulsed through touch, that bypassed his ears because it didn't need them. A connection neither Marcus nor anyone else in that room understood. And Ash began to glow. The glow emanating from Ash was white gold, almost blinding, and no one in the room knew what to do with it. The lesser vampires recoiled, their ancestral instincts recognizing something their immortal brains couldn't process. Magic. Ancient magic. Magic that shouldn't be alive in a boy who had only 17 years of immortal life. Marcus could feel it at his fingertips, the sensation of something expanding through his own body, as if he were channeling a river that originated in Ash and flowed through him. It was like being a flame without burning, like drowning in air, like being alive in a way he'd never experienced. And then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The glow vanished. Ash fell to his knees, gasping, his wild eyes searching for something Marcus understood was for vibration, for that constant connection with the ground that was his only anchor in the world. Marcus knelt with him, his hands trembling, and that's when he saw Victor's face. It wasn't shock, it was recognition, as if the prince's heir had just received confirmation of something he secretly feared and desired in equal measure. Prince Nathaniel slowly placed his glass on the table. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. In a restaurant where he was accustomed to hearing furtive whispers and decadent laughter, the absence of sound was deafening. All eyes were on Marcus now, the invisible boy who had become impossible to ignore. Marcus could feel the weight of those eyes like a physical burden, as if they were branding his skin, cataloging him, rewriting his importance on the Rare Cuts social map in a way that was anything but advantageous. The prince stood up, and Marcus understood in that instant that he had made a catastrophic mistake. He hadn't saved Ash, he had exposed a secret someone, likely Nathaniel himself, had spent years trying to keep hidden. As the prince walked toward him, Marcus had a perfectly clear moment of comprehension. He was going to die. Too young, too painfully, and too far from anyone who could witness the injustice of it. But Carla appeared, his mother, emerging from the kitchen with a crystal tray that shouldn't even have been in her hands, placed herself between her son and the prince, and she said something that would change everything. "He didn't know what he was doing, Your Highness. No one was meant to know what was happening." There was something in her tone that made the prince stop. It wasn't submission, it was complicity. As if Carla shared a secret with Nathaniel that Marcus had never suspected existed. The prince studied Marcus's mother for what felt like an eternity. and then did something no one in the entire history of Hope's Peak had seen. He genuinely smiled. "Ah," he whispered, "so you finally found him out, or he found himself out. Both scenarios are equally fascinating." Carla blinked, and in that blink, the entire dynamic of the room reoriented itself. The lesser vampires understood there was to be no death tonight. Victor understood that his mother, because yes, this could only mean one thing, had been hiding a truth for 17 years. And Marcus understood that his entire life had been a lie, carefully constructed with love by a woman who had never simply told him who he truly was. The hours that followed were chaotic. The prince ordered all the lesser vampires to leave, all except Victor. Ash was taken to Nathaniel's private quarters, Marcus following, one hand still vibrating, still connected to that boy in a way that even distance couldn't break. Carla was led to an office, where Marcus heard her shouting for the first time in his life, her controlled tone finally cracking as she demanded answers. And it was in that chaos that the truth began to unravel in pieces. Marcus wasn't just half vampire. He was a descendant of a very specific lineage, a lineage that had been cured of its vampiric nature generations ago, converted to human as a political escape from a war no one quite remembered anymore. His grandmother had been the prince's own lover centuries ago, before Nathaniel had come to Hope's Peak, before he had adopted Ash as part of a much larger plan. Because Ash had also been chosen, not because Nathaniel felt pity, but because Ash's deafness was precisely the quality needed to unlock certain types of magic that would otherwise remain dormant. Magic that existed in Marcus's blood. Magic Nathaniel had been cultivating for decades, patiently waiting for the right moment to arrive. And Marcus, with a simple touch, had accelerated everything. When Marcus was finally allowed to leave Nathaniel's office, his mother was crying silently.
So secrets finally freed after 17 years of containment. Victor was waiting for him in the private corridors, his face as white as marble, and whispered only, "Ash feels him, through the connection. He's not alone for the first time in his life, and he doesn't know what to do con it." Marcus understood then that he had done far more than make a mistake. He had started something. He had opened a door that couldn't be closed. And on the other side of that door, things very old and very dangerous were beginning to stir. Ash slept in Marcus's quarters, and it was the strangest thing Marcus had ever witnessed. Vampires don't sleep. Vampires don't need to sleep. But Ash, the boy whose deafness made him a ghost among immortals, lay in Marcus's bed as if he'd never truly allowed himself to rest until that moment. Marcus understood, through that connection that still pulsed between them, that Ash had never felt safe enough before, never been allowed. The vibration of other vampires' presences, always hostile, always prepared for attack, had kept Ash in a state of perpetual vigilance. Until Marcus, until that touch that had saved and condemned him simultaneously. Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed, unable to sleep, unable to pull away, and that's when Carla appeared in the doorway. She had been awake the entire time. Marcus could read the guilt in her eyes as if it were printed text. "You deserved to know," she whispered, sitting beside him. "But if Nathaniel had found out you knew before the exact moment—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Marcus perfectly understood what was being implied. His knowledge was dangerous. His existence was dangerous. And now that he had awakened the power in Ash, everything was irrevocably in motion. Carla told the story in whispers, how she had been chosen centuries ago because there was specific blood in her veins, how Nathaniel had loved her in a way vampires shouldn't love, with jealousy, with possessiveness, with the illusion that immortality could be shared as a gift instead of a curse. How she had fled, and how he had let her go, but not without leaving a mark. Not without leaving Marcus in her womb as an insurance policy, a small curse disguised as a blessing. Marcus was never meant to know, never meant to despair, never meant to activate what slept in his blood. But Nathaniel had always known that a day would come when Marcus would discover the truth. And when that day arrived,
Nathaniel would have a deaf boy waiting, someone who needed saving, someone whose deafness would create a barrier against certain types of vampiric control. Ash had been bought from a human orphanage 3 years ago. That boy no one wanted. And Nathaniel had vampirized him not out of pity, but for a purpose. It had all been theater. Every rejection, every humiliation, every cruelty, they were all part of a plan to transform Ash into someone so desperate for connection, so hungry for belonging, that when Marcus finally touched him, the magic would awaken without resistance. Marcus felt rage explode within him like spontaneous combustion. His father, because it had to be true, the math worked, the inheritance worked, had built his entire life as a cog in a centuries-old vampiric machine. And his mother had allowed it, had consented to be trapped in that house of lies to keep him safe. "What does he want?" Marcus whispered. "Why awaken it now?" Carla took her son's hand, and for the first time, Marcus saw his mother completely defenseless. "He's dying," she said. "Vampires don't age, but they can degrade. They can become empty." And Nathaniel realized years ago that he had lost something he could never recover. You and Ash together, connected through that ancient magic, you are the key to something that was hidden even before he was born as a vampire. Something that was locked deep within the heart of Hope's Peak. Something that could save him. Or destroy everything. It was then that Ash awakened. Not gradually, suddenly, his eyes flew open, and Marcus could feel the irrational panic even before Ash touched anything. The boy was having a nightmare through his connection with Marcus, absorbing all the revelations, all the rage, all the betrayal. Ash scrambled from the bed, his fingers searching for any surface he could touch, any vibration that could anchor his reality. And Marcus moved instinctively. He placed his hands on Ash's shoulders full force, a clear vibration of, "You are safe, you are with me." And Ash, a desperate fighter, began to channel magic. White gold magic that burned the air around them, magic that had no name because it shouldn't exist. The walls began to crack, the glass began to shatter. And that's when Victor entered, his red eyes blazing with pure vampiric power, and did something no one expected. He embraced them both, his own brother and the stranger who had awakened everything. Victor, channeling his own ancestral magic, dampening Ash's outburst, containing it, focusing it. And when the magic finally calmed, Victor whispered something that would be the ruin of them all. "Someone is coming down to the rare cut. Someone Nathaniel shouldn't have awakened. And he knows you've awakened the power. He's coming for Ash now." The impact was like an earthquake rumbling through all of the rare cut. The lights illuminating the restaurant flickered. The crystals on the tables began to vibrate. And all the vampires present felt, in a way that wasn't auditory or visual, but something far deeper, that something ancient was awakening. Marcus could feel through the connection with Ash pure fear, irrevocable despair, the sensation of being hunted by something that shouldn't exist. Victor placed himself before them, his vampiric form fully manifest. Skin pale as porcelain, eyes like crimson flames, ancestral power radiating from his body like heat from a furnace. He was trapped on the deepest level, Victor whispered, and Marcus understood he was talking about the cut's subterranean levels, those no one was allowed to access, those that legends whispered held things even ancient vampires dared not name. Nathaniel awakened the lock when he awakened Ash, because Ash is the key. Ash has always been the key. The door to Marcus's apartment exploded inward. It wasn't opened, it was vaporized. And descending the stairs, because it was above them, it was coming from above, was a figure that shouldn't be possible. A vampire. No, it wasn't exactly a vampire. There was something wrong with its structure, something that provoked nausea just to look at. Its body had too few bones, or perhaps too many. Its skin moved in unnatural ways. Its eyes, when they landed on Ash, shifted color 5 times in a second. "My son," the creature said, its voice like grinding glass, "my son has finally awakened, finally remembered who he is." Everything froze. Marcus looked at Ash, at Victor, at the thing descending the stairs, and understood. Ash hadn't been adopted by Nathaniel by chance. Ash had been stolen. This being, whatever it was Ash's vampiric father. The father Nathaniel had killed or imprisoned. The father whose death had orphaned Ash within a week of his vampiric transformation. And Nathaniel had paid for his deafness, had bought his loyalty through prolonged humiliation, all to keep the boy away from his true creator. "He comes with me now," the being said,
extending a hand that had far more fingers than was biologically possible. "And you," it pointed at Marcos, "you come too. Because, in truth, it's not Nathaniel who wants the power in your blood. It's me. I'm the one who's wanted it for centuries. And your touch to the child awakened the mark I placed in your blood long before you were born." Marcus felt Ash's hand trembling. Through the connection, he received fragmented visions, memories that weren't his, memories of Ash being vampirized, of Ash begging to be transformed, of Ash pleading for death because life as a human was torture, and the being toying with him, using him, and then, suddenly, everything going dark. Ash had been unconscious, brought to the orphanage already transformed, already marked, already part of a plan so complex no one could fully comprehend it. Victor roared, a vibration of power that made the apartment walls begin to crumble. He moved to attack the being, but was thrown back as if he were nothing, a child's toy being discarded. The ancestral power Victor had cultivated his entire life was irrelevant against that. "You kept me imprisoned for centuries, Nathaniel," the being continued, descending another stair, its presence becoming increasingly oppressive. "But when that boy touched the child, when the mark awakened, the prison began to break. And now I am free, free to take what was always mine, free to take Ash, free to take the power that exists in the invisible boy's blood, and more importantly, its silhouette passed through a shadow, and Marcos saw for a brief moment its true face, something that was neither vampire nor human, but something prior to both, free to reclaim Hope's Peak as my domain once more. Carla appeared behind Marcus, pulling him back.
But it wasn't to flee, it was positioning. Marcus understood when his mother placed her hands on his shoulders and began to channel her own suppressed vampiric power. Power she had hidden for centuries, power she had kept dormant in her human blood to keep herself safe. She had been a warrior once, and she would be again. Ash, in that moment of supreme realization, did something no one expected. He began to vibrate purposefully, using his entire body as an instrument, as a transmitter. Marcus felt the magic surging through the connection, expanding, multiplying. It wasn't aggressive, it was defensive. It was the magic of someone who had spent his entire life fighting to be heard, and had finally found a voice. Victor rose. His power, his regenerando, his eyes now no longer red gold, but silver, a color Marcus had never seen in any vampire. Silver like the magic that pulsed through his body, as if Ash had activated something in him too. "You destroyed my brother," Victor whispered, and that whisper was more terrifying than any scream. "You tortured him while we pretended to be enemies. And now I will show you what it means to have a true heir of a lineage you underestimated." The being began to descend the last step, and all of Hope's Peak, from the subterranean depths to the heavens, began to tremble with the impact of the conversation that was about to unfold. The battle didn't last as long as Marcus expected, not because someone won quickly, but because the true fight wasn't physical. It was something far deeper, far older. When the being touched Marcus, when its excessive fingers tried to drain that ancestral mark it had planted centuries ago, Marcus finally understood what he had inherited. It wasn't just dormant vampiric power, it was memory. Centuries of memory that wasn't his, but that his body had absorbed through his father's blood. He saw the being when it was still a common vampire. He saw the moment Nathaniel had learned to control it. He saw the place where it had been imprisoned, not in a room, but in a vacuum between realities, a non-place where time didn't pass and sanity was just a memory. And he saw why Nathaniel had done it, because that being had threatened to take Ash. Because centuries ago, the being had fathered a child with a vampire woman, and Nathaniel had stolen that child to raise her, love her, protect her. Ash was a rescued child. Ash had always been a rescued child. And Nathaniel had spent 300 years pretending Ash was his adopted son, when the truth was far more complex. He was stolen. He was saved. A boy who had two fathers separated by chasms of time and magic. When Marcus locked that memory within himself, when he integrated that ancestral truth into his own identity, something changed. His body began to glow. Not white gold like Ash, but silver with veins of gold. A color that was unique, that was his, that was new. Marcus was transforming, not into a vampire, but into something that likely had no name in any known language. The being screamed, a frequency that shattered every window in the building, because it understood in that moment that the mark it had planted in Marcus no longer controlled him. It had been transmuted. Where a city streets were beginning a glow come a light that had never existed before. You need to choose now, Marcus. You can accept what you've become, or you can fight against it. You can use this power to free or to enslave. You can keep Ash by your side, or let him discover who he is on his own. Marcus looked at Ash, and through that connection felt the answer even before the boy vibrated his decision through touch. Ash didn't want to be alone. Ash wanted to be with Marcus, with Victor, with that new thing that had emerged between them. A bond that wasn't vampiric, wasn't human, but was real. It was true, and it existed. "If you're planning on doing what I think you're planning," Nathaniel whispered, turning to Marcus with a smile that held centuries of desperate hope, "you'll need to understand that there are other cities, other vampires, other beings who have been imprisoned or rejected. Another world that needs to be rewritten." Marcus looked then that this wasn't an end. It was a beginning. And when he felt the presence of other entities awakening throughout Hope's Peak, other presences that had recognized that cosmic shift, he understood that his story was only the first chapter of something much larger, something that was just beginning. If you want to know what happens when an invisible boy, a deaf vampire, and a rejected heir need to save a world that never accepted them, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what comes next will definitely surprise you.